real-life X-Files, Milford and Dover's cases include mysteries, livestock mutilations, malicious hauntings, and sightings of skinwalkers and Bigfoot. Documented evidence the Rangers collected. Evidence include photographs of strange footprints and handprints and images of fireball-like lights above St. Butte.
So this is the book that we're referring to. It's called The Paranormal Ranger by Stanley Milford Jr. It's an investigator's search for the unexplained. And with the theme of Halloween, we wanted to talk about this new publication that's come out. I'll read a little bit about the author to share to start. Stanley Milford Jr. graduated from the United States Indian Police Academy, worked continuously as a sworn law enforcement officer for over 23 years, and served as the delegated chief Navajo Ranger for over 2 years. While with the Navajo Rangers, Stan oversaw a section called the Special Projects Unit, whose responsibilities included investigating reports of the paranormal or supernatural. After leaving the Navajo Rangers, Stan served as the senior investigator for the Navajo Nation's white-collar crime unit. This book, excuse me, was published by William Morrow. It's an imprint of HarperCollins Publishers, and it's actually the book of the book choice of the reading club that I recently joined. It's copyrighted in 2024, and this is a first edition hardcover. So Stanley Milford Jr. is a young, just kidding. He started out as a young, curious fellow who was very intrigued with service and nature and land protection, and it guided him, through his life. There's a little insert here on the sleeve. I'll read that real quick. As a Native American with parents of both Navajo and Cherokee descent, Stanley Milford Jr. grew up in a world where the supernatural was both expected and taboo. Shapeshifters roamed. Witchcraft was a thing to be feared, and children were taught not to whistle at night. In his youth, Milford never went looking for the paranormal, but it always seemed to find him. When he joined the fabled Navajo Rangers, a law enforcement branch of the Navajo Nation, who are equal parts police officers, archaeological conservationists, and historians, the paranormal became part of his job. Alongside addressing the mundane duties of overseeing the massive 27,000 square mile reservation, Milford was assigned to utterly surreal and shockingly frequent cases involving mysterious livestock mutilations, skinwalker and Bigfoot sightings, UFOs, and malicious hauntings. In The Paranormal Ranger, Milford recounts the stories of these cases from the clinical and deductive perspective of a law enforcement officer. Milford's Native American worldview and investigative training collide to provide an eerie account of what logic dictates should not be possible. So that's a really great, I think, snapshot about the topic, and it's been a really good read so far. So I am about 7 chapters in, and there's really good information in here. So I can delve into that. I can field some questions, but I can also share with you some really scary pictures. Just kidding. Like, these are the drawings that he included in the book of what he has seen himself. And I'm like, yep. And then like, there's things like this too. Yeah, so it's really interesting. Yep, so pretty cool.
When you were reading the little jacket of the book, it reminded me of, remember when they had that show Navajo Cops?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they'd get called out to like spooky paranormal like instances.
Mm-hmm.
what I was thinking about.
And that's what you read about in this book. It's really interesting. So the Navajo Rangers, they have a really big task in front of them. They're not really the guys that are going to be pulling cars over on the highway, right? Like their jurisdiction is pretty wide though. And he does talk about his first accounts, and it's like the write-up says, he wasn't looking for it, but it always seemed to find him. He's out there on his own, he's out there in the dark, he's engaging in investigative work, or he's on special assignments. There's this really cool chapter that piqued my interest. It's about, there was a manhunt that happened back in the day, and it's chapter 3, manhunt in the desert. And there was a major crime that occurred. I believe it was like in the Farmington area, where a police officer was gunned down. And he writes about this group of militia that were located in that region, more like toward the Utah side, where there was a militia that were training constantly for like the apocalypse. They were training in firearms, explosives. They were gathering supplies so that they could live off grid, and very, very radical, very but thriving. They had a whole
Preppers,
network. What?
doomsday preppers.
Yeah, they were doing that too. And so they were always running these trainings though, like in the canyons. So they were familiar with the environment, and they were also very familiar with the operations of law enforcement in that very rural region. And so when that crime occurred, all everyone came together to seek out the individuals who had done this, and they were on the run for months and then years. And he's talking about his role in that investigation, where he was out in the desert, working with like SWAT teams, FBI, like going, like they were running so many different missions during that time though. He shares a story about where he was scanning. He was kind of up on a very high plateau, like a hill, looking down into this like valley area, and it was dark, and he was scanning it with night vision goggles, and he had seen just a flicker of light, because those night vision goggles, they amplify any light source. And what the fugitives had done, so the fugitives were actually in that valley that night, and what they had done was they had built a fire, but they covered it. They had like these covers to kind of block out the light, and he saw just a little flicker, and then he could kind of see movement around there. And so they didn't have all their teams in force to go in at that time, so he had to let his partner know. They called it in, they had to kind of mobilize. So while that's happening, he noticed that they had kind of put the cover back on, and they were probably sleeping at that time, or they had moved, because I think they had become accustomed to moving at night, so they weren't visible during the day, but they still had to like eat and cook their food and things like that. So anyways, that night he had the vision goggles on, and he started to kind of look up and look at the horizon, and then look up at the stars, and he had never seen the stars like that with night vision goggles, all that detail and the vastness and the beauty of it. So he was really caught up. And then he saw a light that was moving. And this is where he talks about his first UFO encounter, because he had never seen anything like that. And he describes how it was moving unlike anything he had ever seen before. It wasn't moving in a pattern like an airplane or a satellite. It wasn't this consistent. It was very like zippy and moving in different.
Hmm.
So it was really interesting. And then later on during that manhunt, they're going days without showers. They're just eating when they can, just rugged, in the desert. And I guess he had come off a shift, and he was so tired. So he crawls under his truck to go to sleep. He said he like was kind of groggy, and he like turned to the right, and there was something there under the truck looking right at him. So like crazy things like that. And so those are a couple that he shared. And the way he describes it is so like, it's so frightening, but And so he's really descriptive in these encounters that he's had, and it kind of those are kind of the things that kind of woke him up to this other these things that exist that he didn't know, he'd only heard about, because he shares these stories of like being out with his cousins and they're playing around at night, playing hide and seek or whatever, and someone would come running like, I saw something up there, and then all the kids would run back inside. Which, I don't know if you had that experience, but I definitely have. I think a lot of people have had experiences of like playing at night, someone sees something, everyone gets scared and they run inside.
We didn't usually play around at night, but I remember watching The 13th Warrior and I was terrified of just being in the dark. So,
Mhm.
like, every time I visit my Nullies, spend the weekend with my dad, she had like a light porch. And then, like, there's
Mhm.
a clear line of where the light doesn't reach and it's just like pitch black, because there's no street lights, there's no city lights. And I'm
Yeah.
like, the evil man bears are gonna eat me. So I never really went outside at night.
When I was at my grandma's house, we never went outside at night either. She would chase us in. But at my parents' house, we did. And we lived kind of in a neighborhood. We lived on the south side, so it was like sparsely lit, you know what I mean? It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like super lit up. There weren't like street lamps along every street, but it was pretty lit up. Our yard had a light, but sometimes we would go out together and we used to play Spotlight Murder, which was
Mm-hmm.
like that was like our game, or kick the can. And so anyways, yeah, so he's talking about that, and it was really like transporting me back to my youth, which I thought was really fun. But he also integrates interesting elements. So between every chapter about his life and his experiences, he inserts a section on Denef Bahanet, which is our creation story. And it starts with the first world, the second world, the third world, the origin of monsters, the fourth world, Yaitzo and the Hero Twins, and then the Coming of Death is the last one. So it's really interesting how those are inserted. And they're pretty brief. They're like 1 to 2 pages. Like here's the one for the third world. It's like 1, 2. That's it. But it's really well written. It's well written and it's concise. So it's definitely not what you would get if you were sitting around a campfire with your grandpa and he's recounting this rich story to you. But it is a snapshot, which I think is good. I know some people are against the documentation of our stories, but I really feel that it's also important for us to have a general knowledge of where
Mm-hmm.
these stories come from, and also it's also kind of a primer so that I think people can utilize this information and then go back and verify with their families or their friends. Like, this is what I read. What do you think about it? Or this is what he wrote about this instance. I haven't heard that before. Can you tell me more? It kind of starts a conversation.
And sometimes that's the only stories people get. Like,
Hmm.
a lot of families have gone to the Christian belief, or, during boarding school, they just forgot all of their teachings and the stories, and so they don't have it to pass it down to their kids and their grandkids. And
Hmm.
those are the only stories that those later generations can find.
Yes. And I think it's really brave of him to do that, to insert that into this book, because it's almost like in his life he's doing all this wonderful work for the people and the homeland, and he's also encountering this supernatural world. It's right up against his everyday reality, and sometimes it comes together. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
so knowing that and being brave enough to move forward continuously in that line of work, to continuously stay and not run away from it, which I think a lot of people do, because it is scary. It is terrifying. The unknown is very unsettling. I know that there's people who might encounter something that's very terrifying, like on the mountains and they never go back, or people that something happens that frightens them in a canyon and they're just like, I'm not doing that anymore. You know what I mean? And so that happens all the time. And so for him to continuously return and do this work for his entire career, and then be brave enough to not only share his stories and document it, but to insert these cultural, I would say, like gems,
Mm-hmm.
into it, so that, and I don't think he's writing for what some people would call like a European or an Anglo gaze. I think he's writing it for us. That's what it felt like to me when I read it.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like he was writing it for us, like we were his audience. And it was almost like validating too, for me personally at least, because when he was talking about his first experience with seeing like a skinwalker, he didn't write it. It didn't have like Tony Hillerman vibes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he wasn't romanticizing his role in what happened either.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was just something that happened, and it was his experience. And the funny thing though is his description of how it happened was almost exactly the experience of how I experienced something similar. Very, very, very similar. And even our reactions were kind of similar too, which is funny.
So I feel like living on the reservation sometimes that's just like, oh yeah, and then this happened, blah blah blah. But then also my tire broke down. It's like they talk about like the inconvenience, or as the same
Mhm.
of like, oh yeah, we had the thing came on, so we had a ceremony, and now we're all okay now. It's like, oh yeah, we got sick and we went to the hospital, but we're all okay now. Like they like when you hear people talk about their experiences with like paranormal, especially on the reservation in Navajo specifically, it's like they're normal.
It's like matter of fact,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
like
and
it's
it
like
is kind of
it's
normalized.
very normalized. Like some people get a little weird talking about it, like feel like people are gonna judge them or whatever. But then it just other people are like, oh yeah, we had a ceremony because this person was seeing spirits. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah, and like when I had that encounter, I didn't have access to ceremony. You know what I mean? That wasn't my life. I wasn't on a ceremonial or spiritual journey at that time in my life. So it was just this it was this thing that happened that I I didn't know what the proper way to react was or what to do afterward.
Mm.
It was just like um the difference between me and him was he got chased down and I didn't. Like I saw something, but I was so tired that night. I was just like, I don't have time for this. I was like, whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I feel like
okay,
that's
this is
that's my reaction to like ghosts and spooky things that happen. I was like, oh, I don't have time for you. Can you come back later?
totally. I know. I'm just like,
Today?
okay, like,
Really? Of all days,
I know. It's
today.
like, no, I got to get home. Like, I don't have time for this right now. You know what I mean? Like, scare somebody else. But it was so weird because it was literally seconds. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm driving and I see this thing and I'm just like, and I'm like, like, I just kept going. I'm just like, not tonight. I'm going to get home. You know what I mean? I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
get home safely. And I was so tired though. Like, that type of tired where your muscles hurt,
Mm-hmm.
like they're aching and your eyes are just like so like they almost feel like they're dry,
They're
and your
burning
lids are so heavy and you're just like trying to stay awake, and it's almost like you're moving between like the
awake
dream
and
world a little bit, like you're underwater
mm.
and you're just like, I can't, like you're almost slow motion. So that's why my reaction was so slow, like a sloth. I was just like, like,
Yeah, I've had days like that. It's just like too tired to react, too tired to care.
yeah. And then the funny thing is, I was reading through the book and I read about his description of this thing he saw on the road, and it was exactly like what I had seen. Exactly. And I was just like, what the heck? Like, oh, and so I did feel kind of validated that was,
Mm-hmm.
that was what that was it wasn't an illusion. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
I feel like with your reaction, like my whole life, like my dad would tell me, you don't fear things. Like
mhm,
if you're afraid, that feeds them and gives them power over you if you're afraid of them.
mhm,
And so like that's why I try and make my response to things that happen really nonchalant. I was like, this
mhm,
again, and like be annoyed or like just ignore them completely,
mhm,
and so they don't have that power of fear over you. And I feel like a lot of different like spiritual people, like different spiritual practices, that's a key thing of like if you give them fear, then
mhm,
they use that power of that emotion. It feeds them, but it also gives them power over you.
mhm.
So
Yeah, that's what I was taught too. And in the book, Mr. Milford, he writes, my entire worldview had been challenged. All of the myths and legends, every story my parents, aunts, and uncles, grandparents, cousins, and neighbors had told me of shapeshifters and ghosts and UFOs suddenly loomed up in a brand new light full of terrifying possibility. And then a few lines down, he asks the question, what if some of those stories were part of everyday reality, glimpses into a wider, stranger world that most Westerners were either unaware of or simply chose to ignore? So, very much what we had said before, like it's almost like a matter of fact, everyday kind of thing. But it's really interesting because he's talking about how this encounter really kind of woke him up and it shifted his worldview. And he started to ask, what if? What if monsters were real? You know?
maybe him asking that question to himself opened himself up to it.
Mhm.
Um, because like some family members of mine, like they were called to do a specific thing, but they didn't
Mhm.
want that, so they shut that down. They don't involve themselves in those things because they don't want to do that, and basically, they close that door or that
Mhm.
window or whatever it is. But
Mhm.
then maybe some people just like, oh, what if? And then it opens, and then they can find you.
Mhm.
It's kind of, you know, that saying of like, if you look into the abyss is looking back at you, sort
Mhm.
of thing.
Mhm.
And you gotta be prepared when you do that and open those doors.
Or ask certain questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think that's why they always say like watch your thoughts, be careful what you think, because you have to really guard your thoughts and you have to be careful what you seek out and what you expose yourself to because it will affect you. And I think you're right, it does open doors, it does open opportunities. And I think that also goes into other philosophies like manifestation. People talk about manifestation all the time. It was a big hot topic in 2022 to 2024, and everyone's manifesting this life, right, that they want to have for themselves. And I think that's real. I think if you really do focus on what you want, opportunities are going to open up for you. If you really focus on the life you want, you're going to build that. But if you also are not intentional and you're kind of frivolous and you're really letting your mind just, you're not reining it in or focusing it. Your behavior, like the way you speak, is also not going to be reined in or focused, and then what you do is not going to be reined in or focused. And so being very intentional, I think, is key to creating the type of life that you want, but also finding the answers to the questions you're asking. So he starts asking these questions and he starts wondering, and I think he really did. And I think what I think too is he kind of put himself into positions or situations that allowed for these encounters to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he chose to do work that was going to be very isolating, in rural locations, in areas of the landscape that do have a deep history of things happening like that, right? Or certain activities occurring, I guess. And so he's going into this work hearing little like whispers of like, oh, be careful for this, or, like little warnings, little like maybe even jokes and stuff about certain areas. Like, how you were joking about Chun-Li,
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, or how we're kind of joking on the live about the highway that goes through Hopi.
Hmm.
We hear these stories, but if you were to put yourself in that situation where you're driving alone at night on this highway, what's the likelihood of you encountering something like a lone hitchhiker or a ghost, or you know what I mean, something like I've seen people on that road too, like I remember one night I was driving back from like Gallup area, and I was going through back to Tuba City, and there was a guy. He was all dressed in black and he had long black hair, and he was walking in the middle of of my lane.
Hmm.
And I went around him. I saw him, luckily. I slowed down. I went around him, and I was just worried about him. Like, like, why is he out there in the middle of the road all dressed in black? And I was concerned about him, but I also was not going to stop and be like, "Hey, do you want to ride?"
Right?
You know. And then it also made me wonder too, like, was that a trap? I never saw his face. I only saw the back of his body, and I was like, "Well, are these like what if he was a ghost? What if something happened to him and he's wandering on the highway still? What if I did stop? What would happen?" You know what I mean? So, or what if I myself had an accident if I hadn't seen him in time, So it's just crazy because, like, I saw him too, like, just as I was going around a curve. And so, if a car had been coming, or if you know what I mean? If things had been just timed a little differently, it could have resulted in a collision. But again, I was driving, like, I was very determined to get home, and very much of the mind, like, I'm going to get there no matter what, like nothing's going to stop me from getting home tonight. And that's usually how I travel. Very, like, before I even leave, I'm already planning and thinking about coming home. I never ever let it in my mind that I'm not going to make it back. Yeah, I think that's what, again, how we use our mind to guide our thoughts, actions, and lives. There's another excerpt I wanted to share that I think is kind of interesting, just because I think I wasn't really aware of what the Rangers did. I was aware of what law enforcement did, EMTs, firefighters, not so much about the Rangers. And he wrote this interesting excerpt. He wrote, "The difference between being a typical police officer and being a Navajo Ranger is something like the difference between being a doctor and being a medicine man. A Western doctor treats a patient's specific symptoms and sends them home. But a Navajo medicine man takes a more holistic approach. He wants to bring the patient back into balance, bring their entire life into harmony. In the same way, I wanted to bring the individuals I encountered into balance with their surroundings and community. I found it far more effective to take time to talk to offenders and help them understand the reasons for the laws they had broke and what the consequences might be, rather than simply issuing tickets." And then, of course, he writes about like different examples and he shares more stories. But I thought that was a really good kind of concise explanation about what his approach was, and how the Rangers kind of view their work a little differently, uniquely.
I'm still just kind of thinking about how like it's so normal but still kind of not normal, you know? Like when you're going to
Mm-hmm.
school and then like you see a kid who's like wearing the same clothes for a couple of days and you ask them about
Mm-hmm.
like, "Oh yeah, I had a ceremony or we went to a ceremony or was at a sing or something." You know?
Mm-hmm.
And like it just happens
Mm-hmm.
and there are always things going around
Mm-hmm.
and going on and it's just normal. Like I
Go
always say
ahead.
like when you see like something political like you know like thunderstorms or like there was the even the instance of the tornado and
Mm-hmm.
everything or I think even with the current president falling off his horse during one of the
Mm-hmm.
parades, it's like Navajos are so superstitious. Of
That
like
happened because, yeah,
right? And
yeah.
there's like all of these little like taboos and things that are just a part of our lives. Like the no
Mm-hmm.
whistling at night. You don't point at the rainbow with your finger. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
there's all these different things and it's just woven into our lives. Like sometimes you don't think about it until someone outside calls you on it. You're like, why don't you do this? Like, I don't know.
Well,
Really.
in Dine Babehazani, like Dine fundamental law, it's outlined as customary law. So there's these customs like not pointing at rainbows or not whistling at night that are linked to deeper understandings of why that's disrespectful or reckless, right? Because you could say don't whistle at night, and if you don't know why, it's like, oh, but the reason is you don't whistle at night because you're going to call these spirits to you. They're going to know your location. It's like, it's foolish. It's like, oh, I'm right here, you know. And I have no teachings. Come get me.
Like my little one, my little oldest one, she was asking, I was like, why can't we whistle at night? Why can't we whistle at night? And we were watching, my husband likes watching it. It's called Nuke's Tops 5. Like I said before, it's like
Mhm,
random scary videos on the internet, like from TikTok or YouTube, and they just like, was
mhm,
this real? Do you think it's fake? Anyways, like, see, this is why you don't whistle at night, because you're calling the spirits, like, hey, come hang out. It's like, oh,
mhm,
okay.
mhm.
And it's kind of, like, kind of hard to think about or like explain to people.
When it comes to my kids, for when they were younger, it was very much like because I said so. You know what I mean? But then as I got older and they wanted to know why, I had to be ready to answer those questions. And so one of the things that was really helpful for me is if I knew the answer, I would share. If I did not know the answer, I would say, I'm going to find someone who's going to be able to answer this question for you. And when they became very curious about these things, it was really when we were living in Saley, and I was working for Dina College at the time, and there were a lot of culture teachers and professors who also worked there. And one of the questions that my son had asked was he he wanted to know why Navajos were discouraged from going into going into space. You know what I mean? Like becoming astronauts or and I didn't know, I had no idea. And so I said, I'm going to ask somebody, I'm going to find out. And so we happened to be taking these classes. They were categorized as DMB classes. They're basically connecting students with cultural knowledge and ceremonial practice, including ethics and proper protocols in ceremony, but also learning songs, which is really cool. But the kids were always welcome. And it was nice because it was in the evening, so we could go after work and we knew dinner was going to be covered and we could just learn together. And so one day I asked the instructor, who was at the time Hatafli Avery Denny, who's also a professor there. And I asked him, my son here asked me the other day, why are we discouraged from going to space? I don't know what the answer is. Can you answer? Or can you share with us like what you know? And he said that he's like, oh yeah, I get that answer, or I get that question all the time from students. There's a lot of students that they dream of becoming an astronaut and they don't know why they're discouraged from doing that. And so he said the reason why is because all of the songs and ceremonies that we were given to us by Diendina. So basically they cover the Nahostan, the earth, and Yadishyas, the sky, and everything between it. And so that entire space is a protected space. We were given songs, ceremony, prayer, history, culture, language, everything we need to live, resources, food, water, air, everything, right? It's all covered in that space. And it's a protected space. But below the earth's crust, not protected. And like if you're wanting to travel, that's why they always say don't go into caves and like don't go into the earth, like deep, deep into the earth. That's a space for other beings. That's a space not for us, not for five. That's why they call us five finger earth surface people. Our place is on the surface of the earth, not below the earth. That's where the insect people live. That's where reptiles live, right? That's where other beings live. It has nothing to do with like this idea of like hell. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's more than that. And then above the like above where they say the sky is, that's literally the atmosphere,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the atmosphere protects the earth. The atmosphere protects all the beings underneath it and within it. And so beyond that, though, there's no songs, prayers, or protections beyond that space. And they say the only two people who have ever been able to make that journey are the warrior twins when they went to visit their father, who is the sun. And that's the only time. And they too were like hybrids, you know, they were both. So they were holy people too. So they were able to make that journey. But for us, we're not. That is not our place. And so that's why. So he said, if you were to leave the atmosphere, what can we do? It would be learning for all of us. What we can do is when you return, once you're back in the atmosphere again and you're back on Earth, there are definitely things that we could do to like pray for you. But whatever, you're taking a big risk leaving the atmosphere, you know. And that's just science, right? It's very dangerous beyond the atmosphere for humans because that's not where we're meant to be. So every time you leave, you're going to risk many, many things. And whatever you encounter there or bring back is also dangerous. So he was just saying the reason why people are discouraged is not to put like, you know, water on their fire, but it's really just to warn them and say, this is very dangerous. There's no protection for you beyond the atmosphere. So you have to really be in the know of what you're getting yourself into. And you have to be ready to, I mean, while you're here, we'll do what we can. When you come back, we'll do what you can. But we really like what if you were to encounter something out there and then bring it back to Earth? You know, and I know there's like processes for cleansing when, you know, astronauts come home where they have to make sure they don't bring any kind of biological like beings back with them, even if it's something like a
Space
like
bacteria.
yeah, even if it's a bacteria, that is very dangerous. So they have to kind of cleanse them. So I don't know. I mean, it's just really interesting. So that was his answer. And to me, that was sufficient. And at the time, it was sufficient for my son. And so I think it's good to ask these questions. You know, it's really good to know what you can and cannot do, but also why.
Mm-hmm.
Not live in fear, but live in a space of knowing, I think is really important.
Yeah, like with my little one, just saying because I said so
Mm-hmm.
was never enough. She needed a reason, and you know,
Mm-hmm.
I knew she wasn't trying to be defiant or rebellious. It's just in her brain she needed to know why. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. I know this is a different the Silence They Left episode. It's just kind of easing us into the other stories, a little bit of true crime, a little bit of paranormal for the spooky season of it all. Also, you know, just listening to stories by other natives who've experienced these things, true crime adjacent, whether it's not explicitly missing and murdered people. But yeah, it's just nice being able to have these books available, these stories available to consume if that's something you are emotionally, mentally able to do. Because sometimes these stories can be triggering and scary and just put you in a bad headspace. But, you know, if you're okay with that, just like, you know, with scary movies or scary video games, it's all up to you to be aware of what you're consuming and interacting with.
Well said. And truthfully, we just wanted an excuse to wear our cool sweaters. So just kidding.
So don't forget to
No,
like, share, subscribe.
yeah.
We have merch on the Happy Accidents Fourth Wall page. All links are in the bio or the description. So check those out and hope to see you on the next episode.
Yep. Keep reading, keep telling your stories, and look out for one another. You know, MMIWG is a big, big issue. You know, people are still going missing. There's a lot of people that have not been found. There's a lot of cold cases, and there are ways that we can work together to prevent future cases. And so I think using our minds to kind of use our forward thinking to have a safety net for one another, protect one another, keep that communication up. You know, if you haven't heard from someone, call them. Maybe they're going through something. You know what I mean? Just I think we together can find a way past this so that this issue will one day cease to be an issue. Thank you, everyone, and we appreciate your participation in this series. Yeah.
Good night.